Hello and welcome to Scanter Day's Last Week in AI podcast, where you can hear AI researchers chat about what's going on with AI. As usual, in this episode, we will provide summaries and discussion of some of last week's most interesting AI news. You can also check out our Last Week in AI newsletter over at lastweekin.ai for articles we did not cover in this episode. And by the way, one last plug, we recently got on the new app clever.fm, which has a nifty UI where you can get links to what we discuss right there in the player. So you can download it and listen there if you want to see the articles we discussed as you listen. That out of the way, I'm one of your hosts, Andrei Krankov.
And I am Dr. Sharon Joe. And this week, we will be discussing how Walmart is using fully driverless cars. We'll talk about how AI startup funding has hit record highs in Q3 of this year of nearly $18 billion. We'll talk a bit about research on NLP model AfriBERTa for African languages. And we will also discuss, AI cancer diagnosis being less accurate for dark skin. We'll talk about facial recognition yet again, but this time for surveillance of Palestinians. We'll talk about Tesla's full self-driving beta mode causing issues. And finally, we'll end on a fun note with machine learning shushing stressed dogs.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about that one. It's quite fun. So let's dive straight in. First up, we have our application and or business stories. Starting off with Walmart is using fully driverless trucks to ramp up its online grocery business. And this is from CNBC. So just this past week, Walmart said that it started using fully driverless trucking in its online grocery business. It's partnering up with Silicon Valley startup Gatic that since August they've been operating 2 autonomous box trucks with no driver on a 7-mile loop daily for 12 hours. And this is meant to sort of streamline the operations and sort of change up how the typical delivery of products works that makes it more efficient. So yeah, cool to see some actual tests of trucks. I think we've been hearing about it for a long time, but this is a good, sight that something as big as Walmart is actually starting to test and deploy these kinds of things.
Yeah, and it's not just Walmart, Kroger, the supermarket, as well as Albertsons are also trying different things with self-driving. And that's not just self-driving trucks, it's also with, Neuro and other types of self-driving delivery. And it's exciting to kind of see this ramp up. And with Walmart's kind of announcement, this is like the biggest of grocery store items. So it's quite exciting to see this ramp up.
Yeah, it sounds pretty interesting from a logistics perspective. It sounds like, before typically you had these giant distribution centers that were 5 or 4 hours from where actual stores are. And that leads to some issues where you need to set up fulfillment centers close to the customer, and then you can deliver less. Here, it's some kind of new model that they call a hub and spoke model, where you have kind of closer, smaller stores where you can deliver from. And I guess the hope is it'll lead to things being more efficient and really work better for online grocery orders, which is, of course, growing more and more these days.
Right. And this program started in Arkansas and now is expanding to the New Orleans area as well.
Yeah, exciting to see. We also have a little second article here just to mention that there's another story that self-driving truck startup Kodiak Robotics has raised $125 million. And apparently it's one of the last privately held autonomous truck outfits. So yeah, cool to see this growing. And I think it's a little surprising, that this is not deployed yet. I think pretty much everyone is expecting autonomous trucks to be there and, being deployed before autonomous cars is something we can use. So let's get this out of the way and then get to self-driving cars so we don't have to
There are challenges with this too. And I do find it, impressive, but yes, it is a much easier task of doing this 7-mile loop every single day for 12 hours, which is what Gatic is doing for Walmart. And yeah, we'll see how this progresses. I think this one is an obvious one. Obviously, it will have worker implications, all those truck drivers as well, that are not as much discussed in the article.
Yep.
And on to our next article. AI startup funding hits record high of $17.9 billion in Q3. And this is also related to another article titled "Robot Orders by Companies Surge as Labor Shortages Linger." All right. So according to the last State of AI report from CB Insights, the funding in AI has grown immensely. So there was $16.6 billion dollars deployed in Q2 of this year. That's across 588 deals. And now it's all the way up in Q3 to 841 deals and 17.9 billion. So it's grown, and it looks like number of deals has grown immensely, which I'm guessing is for deploying smaller amounts of capital. And the number of billions of dollars has increased, but not as much as the number of deals. So that's really interesting. And also this year there were interesting mega rounds, and mega rounds are $100 million deployed for each round, and there were about 138. So this is quite a few mega rounds happening as startups get bigger and bigger and bigger. And yeah, what are your thoughts on some of this?
Yeah, this is interesting to see. I think I've not been tracking these kinds of details too closely. And yeah, there's interesting details here also that so far out of the year up to now, which is not yet done, we already have 50 billion total with more than 2,000 deals. And there's some interesting details here also that as much as 8.5 billion went to healthcare, 3.1 into fintech, and 2.6 into retail AI. So yeah, interesting to see what healthcare is leading the pack that much. And this is just in this quarter. And then, as you said, related, we also had this article on robot orders, which is another report from the Association for Advanced Automation that says that the total number of orders this year is at 29,000 with a value of over 1.48 billion, which is up 37% from a year ago. So also interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think in large part, healthcare is maybe leading the pack, so to speak, because of one, the pandemic, but also because healthcare companies need a lot more upfront capital to get started. So that often inflates those numbers. Also, what's interesting that we were discussing is that there are now 119 unicorns, AI unicorns, and those are billion-dollar valuations for each company. And in Q3 alone, there were 13 new AI unicorns globally. And it definitely, cheapens the word unicorn here. So we've also been discussing, between us, we're wondering whether, what the number of decacorns is, worth 10 billion. So maybe we should think about that a bit more. No, I'm kidding. Not necessarily.
Maybe not. We'll see. We'll see how many of the unicorns stick around, and then maybe we'll have to reevaluate. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. The dynamics are a little bit weird with people going, SPACing or IPOing, but largely a lot of SPACs going public that way, pre-revenue or, with like questionable amounts of revenue and just the vision. So it's been an interesting year in terms of fundraising.
Yeah, exactly. And the second article on robotics also has some interesting details where we are seeing this big increase in orders. 37% is a big number. And it does note that this is happening amid what some people are calling the Great Resignation. So in September, 4.4 million Americans quit their jobs, and the US economy has 10.4 million job openings. So certainly in robotics, that is a factor that leads to greater investment. I would imagine also in AI in general, maybe not so much right now, but in general, that will lead to more interest in the field, I would guess.
Right. Absolutely.
And moving on from there to some research, we have our first article here, which is University of Waterloo AI researchers introduce a new NLP model called AfriBERTa for African languages using deep learning techniques. So this is about a paper titled Small Data, No Problem, exploring the viability of pre-trained multilingual language models for low-resourced languages. Kind of a fun title. And yeah, basically it's all about how these researchers, instead of doing what is often done now or has been done, is training sort of massive multilingual models that have a ton of data and are trained on 100 languages, something like that. Here they have AfriBERTa, which has 11 African languages and is trained on less than 1 gigabyte of text total. So far less than usual. Usually we have hundreds of gigabytes, even terabytes of data. Here it's much more small data. And their results are quite positive. They show that this works basically on par or better than some of these gigantic models that are trained on many more languages. So yeah, really, really cool research and nice to see more work on low resource languages, which has been kind of not done in NLP as much until more recently.
Yeah, and as expected, they found that using, training models with more than 10 layers didn't really result in improvements in performance because the data sets were so small. So having a smaller model actually was enough to learn some of these things. But something that was counterintuitive that was interesting is that traditionally people thought, we can use a small vocabulary size for small data sets. But through the testing of these models, they actually found that increasing the vocab size actually could improve the performance of the multilingual model quite a bit through this method.
Yeah, they have some interesting findings. They have these 13 languages, and one of their findings is also that, having the similarity of the languages matters. So this is 13 African languages that, of course, are more similar to each other than to something like English. And in fact, they show that this helps. And there's been some other research that shows that actually there can be sort of catastrophic learning where if you mix different languages, it can hurt some of these low resource languages. Yeah, so yeah, definitely cool research and nice to see more work on, NLP beyond English, which, we have a lot of that and there's a lot more languages out there in the world.
Absolutely. And our next article in research is AI skin cancer diagnoses risk being less accurate for dark skin, a study. And so this is based on the paper in The Lancet, Characteristics of Publicly Available Skin Cancer Image Datasets, a Systematic Review. So this was a review paper, and it was aimed to identify and evaluate all the publicly available skin image data sets that are used for skin cancer diagnosis. And basically the authors combed through, Google data set search, Medline, and found 21 open data sets that included a total of nearly 107,000 skin lesion images. And 8 regulated access data sets, 3 regulated access atlases, just a lot of data out there. And ultimately, the authors found, just around 2,500 of the total, nearly 107,000 images within those 21 databases that had the skin type recorded. So not much was being recorded. And actually, only 10 images were from people who, that was recorded had brown skin, and one person who said they had, dark brown or black skin. So, not a great distribution in terms of labeling that. It's also unclear, how well algorithms can build on this, or like whether people felt like that was something to code for, but it's clearly missing in terms of where data sets are concerned. And this is very concerning for, downstream models that are being produced that say, we could do all this like skin lesion identification, but for whom, right? And so this is not necessarily for the entire population.
Exactly. Yeah, this was pretty surprising to me, just how few of these data sets had this sort of metadata. As you said, very few had, the skin type. Even fewer had data on the ethnicity instead of a skin type. So no information about where they're from. There were actually no images with tagged as being African, African Caribbean, or South Asian. And we've discussed some of these kinds of things before. When you're learning for medical diagnosis, it matters that you don't overfit to a certain population, right? You want it to generalize and not work better for white people and worse for other types of people. And if your data sets are imbalanced, as appears to be maybe the case, I would imagine there's a pretty good likelihood of issues coming about. And the degree to which there's just no documentation here. There is documentation for age, sex in about 80% of this stuff, but skin type and ethnicity or not, which to me seems pretty weird. I don't know if you find this as surprising as I do, Sharon.
I think I would have expected people to code it a bit more. I wonder if people felt uncomfortable coding it because it would feel like they're emphasizing race too much or ethnicity too much. I'm not sure, actually.
Yeah, it's also not too clear. Maybe some of these are maybe just focused on the country we're from. So some of these are, maybe from South Korea, for instance, and not meant to be more global. So they're less kind of concerned about this or something like that. Or maybe they're just smaller public data sets not meant to be sort of used for real applications. But it does seem like something that, for large data sets, people actually build models from, presumably would be really needed. And on to another story, moving on to our society and ethics news. We have a pretty, to me, negative story. We have Israel escalates surveillance of Palestinians with facial recognition program in West Bank. And this is from the Washington Post. So this is a pretty detailed report on how the Israeli military has been conducting a broad surveillance effort in the West Bank to monitor Palestinians by integrating facial recognition with a growing network of cameras and smartphones. And this was according to descriptions by recent Israeli soldiers. So this has been rolled out over the past 2 years and is part of this smartphone technology called Blue Wolf that apparently captures photos of Palestinians' faces and matches them to a database of images so extensive that one of these soldiers described it as the Army's secret Facebook for Palestinians. And apparently this app flashes in different colors to alert soldiers if a person is to be detained, arrested, or left alone. And to build the database, soldiers competed last year in photographing Palestinians, including children and the elderly, with prizes for most pictures collected by each unit. And the total number of people is not clear, but is pretty high, presumably.
Well, that's a lot to take in.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow.
I'm actually surprised this didn't bubble up into the news earlier. This seems like quite a big deal that's been going on for a while now. And I mean, this is definitely increases conflict and I mean, sure, it helps them triage people, but it can be concerning, and it does make me wonder what they're, like with false positives, as with any technology here, what that looks like. Yeah, and
there's even more to this beyond this Blue Wolf app. The Israeli military has also installed face scanning cameras in the divided city of Hebron to help soldiers at checkpoints, even before people like Palestinians present their ID cards. So it's quite an expansion. And I think, within the area of facial recognition, this seems like one of the bigger efforts at facial recognition surveillance we've heard of. So I agree that this seems like kind of a big deal. And maybe the story's coming in now because it's actually being deployed. And, it's not meant to be public, but apparently these former soldiers who were interviewed spoke with Breaking the Silence, an advocacy group composed of Israeli army veterans that oppose the occupation. So I think this is not meant to be public, but is kind of getting out there now.
Right. How does this compare to Clearview, huh?
This is... Yeah, I guess it's interesting also that, we do have Clearview here, and this article also notes that within Israel, there's actually been proposals that were rejected for law enforcement having facial recognition cameras in public, which was rejected with a lot of opposition. So this is another example of how things are really quite complicated over, in the West Bank, as we've known, and now AI is getting in there and making things even more tangled. Sharon, I feel like doing this podcast, we've talked a lot about different ethical and societal concerns, and my impression has been that the most prominent and, I guess, pressing issue is facial recognition from all we've discussed. I wonder if you have a similar kind of feeling.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the most concerning one, I think, in terms of how the public feels like it's being used against them. I do see how, like there are security measures and it helps with security in some way. But I think much more needs to be vetted on that side and much more work needs to be done.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of proliferating everywhere. We've also talked about China, Moscow, even the US. So it's definitely just a thing that's being deployed. And I think maybe not enough people are quite aware of the scale of this thing that's growing.
Right. And on to our next article. Tesla vehicle in, quote, full self-driving beta mode is severely damaged after crash in California. All right, so FSD, the full self-driving beta mode, unfortunately resulted in a pretty bad crash by a Tesla Model Y on November 3rd in city southeast of Los Angeles. And this is probably the first incident involving this feature that was released fairly recently, and the car was really damaged, but I think no one was really hurt in the crash, but the car itself was severely damaged. And what happened was the car, self-driving wise, was taking a left turn, but went into the wrong lane. And it was, hit by another driver in the lane next to that lane. And the car did actually give an alert halfway through the turn that something was going wrong. And the driver did take over the wheel and tried to avoid it. But the car actually took control and forced itself into the incorrect lane. And that created a really unsafe maneuver. So yeah, that's pretty scary. The car was actually damaged on the driver's side, which I think, like, when it comes to human drivers, is less likely a place for it to actually be hurt. And so yeah, that's kind of what happened.
Yeah. This was according to a report to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. I think the report was by the driver. I guess there's an investigation ongoing, but at least this is what we know. Yeah, pretty bad, sounds like. There's been some other talking of beta FSD having some issues, especially with left turns. And it does call into question whether you really want to have beta, an opt-in beta where anyone with a Tesla and a good enough safety score can just use this potentially buggy software. So yeah, I think kind of not a great sign for this idea of a public beta, looks like to me.
Yeah, I mean, this is inevitable in terms of what's going to happen. Yeah, it's one, inevitable, but it is bad that it is happening in this way. And yeah, I just wish more safety was being thought about because these are real lives at stake. That said, I did. I remember talking to someone about this, but basically Tesla does try really hard to make it so that it's okay for the car to get kind of smushed as long as the passenger is safe. So it's possible that that's kind of the trade-off that's being made with the way they design the vehicles. I can't completely confirm that, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is a little tricky. I think having a public beta for self-driving software could make sense. I mean, at some point you gotta put it out in the real world, and maybe having it exclusive to safer drivers makes sense, which is what they're doing. But I guess the question is, how much quality control are they doing before releasing the software in terms of making sure there's no bugs on their own? And if things like this happen where it's a pretty bad situation, that does call into question kind of how carefully they're going about it. But we'll see. We'll see.
Right.
And away from these thorny society ethics things, onto our final, more fun stories. First up, we have CMU opens first AI makerspace to let students sharpen the cutting edge of AI. So CMU on Wednesday opened what it says is the first makerspace devoted to software. So it's going to be more focused on things like computer vision, speech recognition, and AI. And there's a picture of it. We'll post it. It's like a nice, I guess, large room with tables and like a little kitchen and a TV. I don't know if people know we had this makerspaces are basically things where engineering students can hang out and, make stuff, right? Usually with a lot of 3D printers and I don't know, like electronic stuff and sometimes mechanical tools. But here there doesn't seem to be any of that yet. It's for software, which is a little confusing.
Yeah, I admit I was kind of confused why they said this was like the first makerspace for AI. Fine. That feels hypey. Unless they outfit it with like insane compute power all around, which I don't see in the photo. I'm like, okay, that's just another, I don't know, empty room to do AI in.
Yeah. The thing about software is any space is a makerspace. You can work on a couch in like the student center, and that's fine. But it's nice to have a dedicated space where you can hang out and work on things. And I'm a big fan of makerspaces. I've used a lot of 3D printing stuff at Stanford and Georgia Tech. So whether it's weird or not, I'm glad that they invested in a space for students to do fun things.
And on to our last super fun article, machine learning shushes stress dogs. Okay, so yes, this is what you think. So there's a really small neural network that detects when a dog barks, and it is currently hooked up to an Arduino that plays a soothing, sound bite to the dog. And this is kind of a cute little project that someone came up with, and turns out it is maybe working a little bit.
Yeah, this is really fun. So this guy, Nathaniel Fallick, posted this YouTube video where he showed that, this dog can get pretty barky at the door. And so when the device detects it, it plays a soundbite of Nathaniel's mom praising or scolding this little dog, which is a cute, little white fluffy dog. It's quite adorable. And there's a demo. It actually makes the dog be quiet. It's cool project. Nice to see that you can actually deploy these little things. It's not using much compute. It's a very small kind of train network on an Arduino, which is interesting. So yeah, really fun, and we'll link that video in the description. You should check it out.
Yeah, I think one of the funniest comments is related to this. Someone said, I leave a radio tune to talk station for my dog. I just thought that was really funny. And related to this, that it's reasonable. It's understandable. I've had a dog before. So, that's a cute little hack. And maybe I can build into something bigger.
Yeah, I could see there being like AI products for, sort of tracking your dog or pet, but also, I don't know, interacting with them and stuff like that.
I think a companion, right? I think that would be very, very cute.
Yeah, exactly.
Got to keep them occupied.
Yeah, maybe I should try and build this for my dogs. They can get pretty barky. Yeah, this is key too, because this dog apparently has separation anxiety, so it barks, if a door, if the person isn't there. So it's a nice application of AI. Feels good.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. And with that, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Skynet Today's Last Week in AI podcast. You can find the articles we discuss here today and subscribe to our weekly newsletter with similar ones at lastweekin.ai. And also please check out Clever FM, who we're friends with, and we're putting our podcast out there, and it makes it easier for you to leave feedback or highlight bits of the podcast that you like.
Yeah, it's quite nifty. I kind of actually quite like it. It has, images and links of what we talk about embedded in a timeline, sort of like YouTube has their little time things in the player, but a little better because there's actually links. So yeah, give it a look, clever.fm. And of course, as always, also subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. And please give us a review. I think we're up to like 5 or 6 on Apple. So I think we could probably do a bit better.
Make us do better.
Please.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Be sure to tune in next week.
Yeah. Tune in next week.